Welcome, everybody, to another episode of the Healing Broken Families podcast, where I host conversations on divorce, parental alienation, and high conflict personalities. I am a divorce coach and your host, Barbara Pointe. Today, I'm pleased and excited to be in conversation once again with Joseph Goldberg, the founder and principal of Goldberg Associates, and an expert in parental alienation. Welcome, Joe.
Hi, Barbara. Thank you for having me.
Yes, so excited about our conversation today. And we've got a lot to discuss, a lot to share with our audience.
Yes, we do.
But before we discuss the new scientific research that you are trailblazing through in your research project, I want to thank you, Joe, for your last podcast with us, because a lot of people still don't know that you picked our program, the Healing Broken Families podcast, to be the first of messengers in your new scientific research. Thank you.
My pleasure.
Because there are millions of people around the world, as you know, that have a keen interest and stake in parental alienation, the parental alienation theory, and just how devastating it is to have a child hate you or reject you for reasons that are often sometimes misunderstood. I feel very honored by your recognition of what we do on this program, and everyone connected with my podcast and my practice is excited to do another podcast on this important topic and to broadcast the most recent information now that you're about to reveal. So let's jump into this. There's a lot, so many questions I want to ask you, Joe. So let's start with the theory of parental alienation. Most people know that this is a theory with supporters and critics on both sides, and you've been a proponent of parental alienation theory for more than 20 years, correct?
That's correct.
The last time you were on my podcast, which has gotten so many downloads, you explained to me that 3 years ago, you started a research project to find out why the models for treating parental alienation were all failing. Help us color in the spaces on that, Joe. Can you help us understand why you have a problem with the PA theory and explain the conclusions you've come to as a result of your new scientific research?
Okay, I'll try to explain some of the problems with parental alienation theory from an empirical viewpoint. When Dr. Richard Gardner first postulated that children were suffering from a syndrome, which he referred to as PAS, or parental alienation syndrome, that was at a point in time that dates back to diagnostic issues in 1985. One of the reasons his theory had fallen out of favor was in part because it attributed all of the blame for the child's rejection onto the shoulders of the other parent. And that abetted parents who were being rejected by their children to become proponents of the theory in the hope of reversing court decisions in high conflict custody disputes. Now, for nearly half a century, scientific scholars have chided Gardner and parental alienation theory with theoretical repudiations. But nothing has deterred rejected parents from believing PAS is a widely validated diagnosis that will ultimately lead to treatment for the children's rejection. A lot of people also don't know some of the history of parental alienation, but Gardner admitted 16 years after his theory that the theory was being misused by many parents who were trying to cover up bona fide abuse. Sadly, this is the kind of thing that happens when a new theory becomes in vogue. Everyone wants to use it and misuse it. And this fact hasn't changed for parental litigants since the 1980s. What I find to be truthful, Barbara, is the fact fathers and mothers on both sides cling to parental alienation theory, not just in hopes of changing custody, but to alleviate the pain of being separated from their children. Because parental alienation as a construct offers a seemingly logical explanation for the loss of their children, and it lets the alleged victimized parent feel guiltless for the child's rejection. Anyway, one of the seismic events in parental alienation theory occurred when Kelly and Johnston wrote a seminal article called The Alienated Child, a reformulation of parental alienation, and that was in 2001. It was a widely acclaimed research article, and it severely fractured parental alienation theory. But it didn't crumble the theory, not completely. The reformulation was peer-reviewed and supported by many scientific scholars, and although Gardner didn't agree with it, it was popular with the majority of legal and mental health professionals for two reasons. First, it introduced a list of new contributing factors that better explained the child's rejecting behavior, some of which shed a light on the negative contributions coming from rejected parents. And the second reason for its acceptance was the fact PASS had spawned a robust industry for legal and mental health professionals to profit from in family law litigation.
Interesting.
Yeah. Now, that was 21 years ago. Let's fast forward. I'll tell you what's changed over the last 2 decades. First, we had a major revolution in scientific history in 1990, thanks to the invention of functional magnetic resonance imaging technology. This is a technology that's enabled us to conduct studies and do experiments in a broad spectrum of scientific fields in a way that could prove the causal factors behind human behavior. And it's transformed science and scientific discovery ever since. Now, here's a confounding fact. Parental alienation theory has never used this technology in a single study, nor in a single experiment to support its theoretical assumptions. And this has been one of the reasons why parental alienation continues to lose support. It simply lacks scientific rigor. And rejected parents do not understand that it's hard to imagine a behavioral study that doesn't include fMRI instrumentation.
Yeah.
So I'll tell you the second reason I have a problem with the theory.
Okay, Joe.
Parental alienation theory has not integrated a single finding of fact from any other field of scientific research that could offer an alternative explanation to challenge its theory. Let me be precise about what I'm saying. I don't want to be misunderstood. Parental alienation theory has not looked at or examined any scientific research conclusions that have come from cognitive science, neurobiology, self-regulation, self-control research, studies involving the unconscious mind, and/or the predictive mind model of mental processing. Parental alienation hasn't integrated factors involving stress and brain circuitry, or even the ongoing research for treating non-suicidal self-injuring behavior, all of which do provide an alternative explanation for the child's rejection. Now, that's a significant aberration. I would say impossible to overlook, but it is being overlooked. It's being overlooked by the proponents of parental alienation theory. And those are my two major problems with it. And I think that most scholars would probably agree with those facts.
Fascinating. Just to bring absolute clarity, Joe, I want to ask you, so are you wanting to dismantle the theory of parental alienation or replace it with a new theory or integrate it in some way with these new factors in the research? Like, where will this take us, Joe?
Barbara, I think that Gardner deserves credit for having identified some very deviant and abnormal patterns of behavior in children, which he had not seen before. And I'd like to point out that Dr. Richard Gardner was a famous child psychiatrist long before he postulated PASS. People may not even know that he was the author of 5 child psychiatry textbooks that most psychiatric clinicians still refer to today. And he did something really important by bringing these incongruent behaviors to the attention of the world. So, speaking for myself and about my own research, are very compatible with contemporary theories that are espoused. And I think alienation theory will be subsumed into one or more theories because there are simply too many factors that alter human behavior, and some of them we have control over and others we don't. For example, there are causal factors in human behavior that only applies to substrates and physiological changes in homeostasis, specifically glucose, because it causes fatigue and depletion effects. And there are other factors that have importance in steering or shaping behavior, sometimes outside of our conscious awareness. Those factors result in automatized behavior. And when I say automatized, I mean decisions that are made through mental processes embedded in our unconscious mind. Those factors are a part of our survival instinct. So we need to accept that we have strong evolutionary drives that we struggle to control. And fully understanding all that there is to know about human behavior is going to remain a bit of a mystery for a lot of years to come. But when we find scientific research is merging into the same lane with the same conclusions, we have to adapt to where it leads us. Gardner expected this. He opined that there would be challenges to his theory. And I think if he was alive today, he would be on board for this ride. And he might even be asking, as I do, why so many parental alienation scholars have not investigated the research that is now out there.
Good point, Joe. Thank you for that. Now, moving forward, I'd like to ask you to summarize the treatment models for parental alienation and tell us why you say they're failing and not repairing the problem with the child's rejecting behavior.
Well, think about this also in terms of parental alienation being a theory that's been around for nearly half a century. And yet there are no treatment models that have been shown to be effective in treating the child's rejection.
Fascinating.
I think we have to ask not only why the treatment models are failing, but why have the advocates for parental alienation been so insensitive and not objecting to the treatment models they know continue to fail? And why do the proponents of parental alienation also find it acceptable that some of the most highly respected experts like Warshak offer treatment models that are only accessible to affluent people? I mean, how many families do we assume can afford $20,000 for a 4 or 5 day intervention, which, by the way, only has a promising, at best, peer-reviewed rating? This kind of reminds me of the argument that climate control can be solved by everyone going out and buying an electric car for $60,000.
I think that's a very compassionate inquiry, Joe.
Yeah. And I have to ask, Barbara, why would a proponent of parental alienation like Dr. Craig Childress, claim that parental alienation can be 100% successfully cured by a non-licensed mental health professional? That's not a way to instill confidence in the public's trust. I think people understand it makes sense if a doctor refers you to another doctor, but for a doctor to refer you to someone that's unlicensed and untrained in any medical or psychological system, well, that just makes no sense at all. And nor should anyone believe that someone has 100% success in treating a condition. And I have to say, why do custody evaluators and the courts assume that the first approach to repair a child's rejection is always reunification therapy? Don't they know by now that unlike children in foster care who are motivated to see and repair a relationship with an offending parent, so-called alienated children are in no way similar. They have zero motivation to see or have contact with the parent that they are rejecting. So let me summarize what has and is still being recommended. There is, as I said, reunification therapy or reintegration therapy. They're similar, but neither produce any bona fide gains in moderate to severe cases of rejection. The public is also being told to consider family therapy, conjoint therapy, therapeutic supervised visitation, play therapy, and individual therapy for the child, and mainly because some portion of the cost would be covered by insurance. So everybody says, what have you got to lose in trying? None of those therapies can claim any success with severe rejection. And in fact, most models of treatment aimed at reunification are terminated after 1 or 2 appointments because it becomes obvious to the clinician that the therapy isn't going to succeed. Just ask any parent who has been down this road, and they will tell you that's true. So next, Barbara, what I want to do is talk about some of these intensive parental alienation therapies. Some are self-described as non-therapies because they follow a psychoeducational model. For example, Family Bridges by Warshak and Overcoming Barriers by Sullivan. It has a slight variation with regard to the participants, but in Overcoming Barriers, there's nothing coming out of this model worth the attention it's seeking. There was also Family Reflections by Kathleen Ray, but that's no longer in operation. And there have been other similar startups that have gone into the dustbin. So if anyone's really interested in the data on these programs, they should read the journal article written by Mercer in 2019. That's a fairly current journal article. Mercer not only discussed the failure of the interventions, but legitimately called into question the safety and risk of harm that these programs engage in. And so I prepared a brief excerpt from that article, Barbara. What I'd like to do is just read it for your listeners. Here's what it says.
Yes, please, Joe.
Silberg, Dallam, and Sampson in 2013 discussed the potential harm to children when parental alienation practitioners discount reports of abuse, blaming them on alienation, and that custody be given to non-preferred parents who are in fact abusive. And the custody decision was eventually reversed because of abuse. The children in these cases suffered from anxiety, depression, PTSD, self-harm, and suicidality, and some repeatedly ran away, thus exposing them to further harm of homelessness and sexual trafficking.
That's very impactful, very impactful. It leads me to want to ask you next, Joe, and I want to ask for everyone listening out there. Have you found treatment models that can help solve the severe degree of rejection from children that these parents receive?
Well, to get to that answer, just remember the medical edict that states, diagnose the condition before you treat it. Unfortunately, many people enter into therapy without a proper assessment, and that leads to a failure. And for children that reject a parent without justification, they need a complete assessment to evaluate the causal factors. It's different when you try to help someone like I do in a single case. You can study all the data in a single case. You can't do that when you try and create a treatment plan for everyone based on a theory. If you want to know what goes wrong when you try to do that, just look at the way parental alienation theory has tried to shoehorn everyone into one model or another and how bad that approach has turned out.
Joe, can you share more information about the future in treating the child's rejection? Like, what is the course of direction that families will likely need to follow based on what you now know?
Well, I think that non-suicidal self-injuring is one of the most interesting avenues to take a closer look at. It's now listed in the DSM-5 as a condition that requires further study. But I have found mountains of evidence from NSSI that offers a new scientific perspective in which to understand what we now call parental alienation. Let me read the definition for NSSI and then explain why I feel it's a way to resolve the child's rejecting behavior. Here's the definition. Non-suicidal self-injuring is defined as the deliberate self-inflicted destruction of body tissue without suicidal intent and for the purposes not socially sanctioned, including behaviors such as cutting, burning, biting, and scratching skin. Right now, there are many studies and journal articles that link NSSI to impairments in the brain. And when you read the literature, you'll begin to see how it also relates to behavior that can include rejection of a parent. And having said that, let me give you my hypothesis. Take any child that would want to terminate all of their contact with a once bonded, still caring and loving parent who is supportive and providing for their needs. And I say that meets the definition of a self-injuring behavior. And the injuring is subcutaneous. Now consider this. An alleged alienating parent would say, I'm not to blame. What if the rejected parent simply agreed rather than clinging to parental alienation theory? I predict the day that happens, it's going to help everyone focus attention on how the child's volition is in fact a self-injuring behavior. And that would not only be a diagnostic shift, it could become a stronger argument in court to help the child to get assessed and treated. It could mean that we'll have to focus on the child's self-injuring behavior before trying to repair the relationship between the parent and the child, because it appears that the treatment approach today isn't in sync with the sequencing of the problem. And by the way, there are literally hundreds of journal articles referring to studies using fMRI technology to identify NSSI impairments in the brain, and the science to show how it is self-inflicted has been identified in a small body of that research. Of course, you won't find anyone in the field of parental alienation talking about this kind of confirming research, because that would only prove how wrong they've been. But let me ask your listening audience to participate in a little experiment. Here's what you can do out there. Ask yourself this simple question. What do you think happens first? Do you think a child's brain responds faster to stress than the time it might take for a parent to program a child to hate and reject the other parent? If you guessed the time it takes to program a child would be faster, you'd be wrong. A child's brain will look to escape from extreme stress almost instantly, because the stress response is a built-in biological mechanism, and the balance of control is very unsteady when the scale is tipped. When a child's stress response is to escape or avoid the stress, that response could include a decision to escape or avoid a parent. So I'm currently doing work on a few cases where I'll be bringing that argument to the attention of the court.
I'm in appreciation right now for this conversation. I have one final question for you, Joe. I know people will be asking how they can find out more about you, Joe Goldberg. They're going to want to know about the services that you provide as a consultant, and probably be wondering how you can help them and their child, and where they can receive support and assistance. Joe, tell us what people want to know now. Tell us how they can find you and learn more about you, and also don't forget to tell us when you will be publishing your new scientific research.
Barbara, I wish I could help everyone that reached out to me. That's the reason I was motivated to start my research project. I really want to help as many people as I can, not a handful of people. There's so many, I'd say millions of people in families around the world that are suffering from the effects of this tragic condition. So I have taken time away from my practice to try and expedite the research. I hope it will get published within the next 6 months. But I'm going to be returning to my practice, and I'm going to be trying to help a few more people that reach out to me. So anyone that might be interested can always go to my website, which is parentalalienation.ca. The CA stands for Canada. And you'll find my contact telephone and email information there. Thank you, Barbara.
Thank you so much, Joe, for this time together today. It was very enlightening, and I appreciate what you've brought to the table for our audience. Thank you.
Thank you, Barbara.
That is all we have time for today on the Healing Broken Families podcast. If this episode provided value, please let us know by commenting on our YouTube and Facebook feeds. Comment, ask, because Joe and myself will answer all your comments, questions, your problems, and concerns personally. So please go ahead now and give us a 5-star review on the podcast platform that you're tuning into. And I wish everyone healing solutions in the now. I'm Barbara Pointe, and thanks for tuning in.